My dear friend, allow me to take you on a journey, a pilgrimage into the depths of your own soul. Perhaps you have come here with a feeling of some unease, a recurring dream that keeps you awake, or a vague suspicion that the life you are living is not entirely in line with who you really are. This is often how our unconscious, that vast, hidden part of our psyche, speaks up. It is a call to adventure, to discover the treasures that lie hidden within you. I have dedicated a large part of my life to exploring this inner landscape. I have come to believe that the main task of our lives, the greatest adventure, is the journey to ourselves, a process I call individuation. It is the journey to wholeness, to becoming who we really are, in all our uniqueness. The story I am about to tell you is about this journey, about encountering different aspects of our soul, and about finding a deeper meaning. Consciousness and its boundaries, ego and persona. Our journey begins in the area we know best, our consciousness. At the center of this consciousness is what we call the ego. Think of the ego as the captain of a ship. It is the part of us that says I, that perceives, thinks, feels, and makes decisions in the world around us. The ego gives us a sense of identity and continuity and is essential for our functioning in our daily lives. However, the ego, as important as it is only a small island in the vast ocean of our overall psyche. We often also create a kind of mask for ourselves in order to live in society, which I call the persona. The persona is the set of social roles and expectations that we adopt in order to be accepted and function in the outside world. It can be the role of a good employee, a caring parent, an obedient citizen. The persona is not bad in itself. It is a necessary compromise between our individuality and the demands of society. The problem arises when we become too identified with this mask, when we forget who we are underneath it. If we live only through the persona, our life becomes superficial and we lose touch with the deeper layers of our personality. Our true self then remains hidden, and the soul suffers. The realm of the unconscious, the personal and collective depths. Beyond the boundaries of our waking consciousness and our social mask lies a vast and mysterious realm, the unconscious. It is a world that often escapes our direct control, but nevertheless powerfully influences our thoughts, feelings, and behavior. I like to distinguish two main layers of this unconscious. The first is the personal unconscious. You can think of this as a repository of everything we have experienced in our lives, but that has been forgotten, repressed, or never reached the threshold of our consciousness. Here are our forgotten memories, repressed desires, unpleasant experiences, but also the seeds of future possibilities. The contents of the personal unconscious are unique to each of us. However, beneath this personal layer lies something much deeper and more universal, the collective unconscious. This is, I believe, an inherited part of the human psyche, common to all people across cultures and historical eras. It is not made up of personal experiences, but rather contains basic patterns of human perception, experiencing, and action, a kind of psychic imprint of the ancient experiences of our species. I call these innate patterns archetypes. The collective unconscious is the source of our deepest wisdom, but also our darkest fears. It is the source of our deepest wisdom, but also our darkest fears. Encountering the shadow, embracing our dark side. One of the first and most important steps on the path to individuation is encountering an archetype that I call the shadow. The shadow represents that part of our personality that we have repressed, denied, or that we consider unacceptable, inferior, or even evil. These are the aspects of ourselves that we do not want to see, the qualities that we do not like and that we often project onto other people, criticizing in them what we actually refuse to accept in ourselves. Encountering the shadow is not pleasant. It requires courage and honesty to look our own weaknesses, faults, envy, greed, or aggression in the face. Many people avoid this encounter because it is painful to admit these dark sides. But the shadow is not necessarily evil. Rather, it is unlived, undeveloped. If we ignore it, it can gain destructive power. However, if we consciously accept and integrate it, it can become a source of strength, vitality, and creativity. By accepting the shadow, we become more whole and authentic. It is, as I have often said, an ethical problem of the first order. Anima and animus, the inner woman and the inner man. Another important archetypes we encounter on our journey are the anima and the animus. These archetypes represent the inner, unconscious opposite sexual side of our psyche. In the male, it is the anima, the inner feminine principle, and in the female, the animus, the inner masculine principle. The anima in a man embodies qualities such as emotionality, intuition, the ability to relate, moodiness, but also a connection to nature and the unconscious. If a man does not recognize and integrate his anima, he may be dominated by inexplicable moods or will project these feminine qualities onto the women around him, often with unrealistic expectations. In my Red Book, the character Salome initially appears as the embodiment of the anima. The animus in a woman, on the other hand, represents qualities such as rationality, assertiveness, the ability to think logically, courage, but also a tendency to dogmatism or unyielding insistence on her opinion. If a woman does not integrate her animus, she may be dominated by rigid opinions or feel insecure in her ability to think and act independently. Integration of the anima or animus is key to psychological balance and wholeness. It allows us to develop a fuller range of human qualities and enriches our relationships with the opposite sex, because we stop projecting our unconscious parts onto our partner and can see them for who they really are. Archetypes as guiding patterns, the language of the unconscious. As I have already indicated, archetypes are the basic building blocks of the collective unconscious. They are universal, innate patterns of thought, feeling, and behavior that shape our experience of the world and our reactions to typical human situations, such as birth, death, love, struggle, and the search for meaning. They are, as I call them, forms without content, which are filled with specific images and experiences in each individual's life. Imagine archetypes as riverbeds through which psychic energy flows. We do not see the riverbeds themselves, but we see the rivers, the manifestations of archetypes in our lives, dreams, myths, fairy tales, art, and religious ideas. The hero archetype drives us to overcome obstacles, the mother archetype to nurture and protect, the wise old man archetype, such as the character of Elijah in my Red Book, to seek wisdom and guidance. There are as many archetypes as there are typical life situations. Understanding archetypes helps us understand the deeper motives of our actions and the meaning of recurring patterns in our lives. When something happens in life that corresponds to an archetype, the archetype is activated and can guide us, but also, if not understood, provoke inner conflict. Dreams as messengers, the royal road to the unconscious. One of the most direct and valuable ways to encounter the contents of the unconscious and its archetypal patterns is through our dreams. 14. I consider dreams to be spontaneous creations of the unconscious psyche, letters that our unconscious sends us every night. Dreams speak to us in the language of symbols and images, and their main task is often to compensate for the one-sidedness of our conscious attitude. For example, if we are too rational in our waking life and suppress our feelings, dreams can bring us images full of emotions. Interpreting dreams should be approached with humility and openness. There is no universal dictionary of dream symbols. The meaning of a symbol must always be sought in the context of the life of a particular dreamer. The important thing is to ask what this dream means to me, what message it brings me about my current inner state, about my hidden desires, fears, or unresolved conflicts. Dreams show us where we have deviated from our natural path and offer us clues to restore balance. The power of symbols, a bridge between consciousness and the unconscious. The language of the unconscious, and therefore also the language of dreams and archetypes, is symbol. For me, a symbol is something more than just a sign. A sign has a clear, unambiguous meaning, a road sign, for example. A symbol, however, points beyond itself to something that is partly unknown that cannot be fully expressed in rational language. A symbol is alive, multi-layered, and charged with energy. It is the best possible expression of something relatively unknown that we suspect but cannot fully grasp. Symbols have enormous transformative power. They can connect our consciousness to the depths of the unconscious, transfer psychic energy, and open up new perspectives. Myths, religious rituals, works of art, all are full of symbols that speak to us on a deeper level. One of the most powerful symbols of wholeness that I have studied often and that appears in many cultures is the mandala, 613. A circular pattern, often with a square in the middle, the mandala symbolizes order, harmony, and the unification of opposites in the psyche. In my Red Book, you will also find many examples of mandalas that emerged during my own intense encounters with the unconscious. 6.2. It is through the knowledge and acceptance of the aspects of the unconscious that we come to know through dreams and their symbols that one can reach wholeness. Active imagination, dialogue with the unconscious. In addition to dream analysis, there is another method for consciously entering into contact with the contents of the unconscious and conducting a dialogue with them. I call this method active imagination. 2.6. It is not passive dreaming or fantasizing. It is a process in which we consciously focus our attention on some inner image, feeling, or character that emerges from the unconscious and let it develop, as if we were watching a play. At the same time, however, we actively participate in this process. We ask the characters questions, we respond to them, we interact with them. The essence of active imagination is, on the one hand, to let autonomous processes take place spontaneously, but on the other hand, to respond with appropriate creative activity. 2. It is like a dialogue between two equal persons, our conscious self and the characters from the unconscious. The goal is not to control the unconscious, but rather to listen to it, understand its messages, and integrate them into our conscious life. It requires the courage to let the unconscious guide us, to surrender to what we may have considered our weakness. 2. This process can be dramatic and emotional, but it is through it that difficult emotions can be transformed and profound insight can occur. Transcendent function, the unification of opposites. The result of a successful dialogue between the conscious and unconscious, whether through dreams or active imagination, is what I call the transcendent function. 2. It is the natural ability of the psyche to overcome the tension between opposites and create a new, higher synthesis. Life is full of opposites: consciousness and unconscious, reason and emotion, introversion and extroversion, good and evil. We often try to suppress one pole in favor of the other, which leads to one-sidedness and inner conflict. The transcendent function, however, does not consist in a simple integration, but rather in a dynamic interplay that allows the tension between opposites to give rise to something new, a third, a symbol, an attitude, an insight that both transcends and at the same time includes both opposites. It is a process towards wholeness, which always means coming to terms with the opposing position. 2. Imagine it as a chemical reaction, where the combination of two different substances creates a new compound with different properties. My red book is essentially a testimony to this process of unifying opposites, of transcending the limitations of the socially adapted self and achieving a wholeness that initially announces itself as the spirit of the deep. 2.